Hi. So this is Tom Gleason. I'm the author of notpowerless.com, and I just want to go over some of my notes and some of the things that I found in the past few years of researching this issue of regulatory capture. And regulatory capture has to do with, well, it doesn't have to do with the 12-step industry, but in my case, what I'm interested in is how the 12-step industry is capturing state departments of health. And the reason I got interested in this topic was because my therapist seemed to be required to require me to go to 12-step meetings, even though both she and I didn't seem to agree with the concepts or like the programs. It seemed to be just policy to send me there, and if I didn't go, write me up as some kind of mental disorder. So that scenario got me questioning and looking up things online, and I found out that this was far from the first time this has ever happened, and it's actually a really big problem. And one of the biggest problems about it is that most people have no clue what's going on, and it's almost impossible to speak out about it or be heard about it because there's a systematic censorship going on. But so the purpose of this, I'm just going to talk for a while, and I'm sort of testing out my ability to speak on this. It's one of my goals for this year is to be able to talk about it. When I had first gone through it, I was really afraid of talking about it at all. It was I won't go into it too much about the whole anti-Alcoholics Anonymous reasons for being anti-AA. Basically, it's a religious cult, and they instill so much fear in you that if you speak out about it, if you imply that something they're doing is wrong, then there's a lot of superstition that you're going to go and drink yourself to death because you don't have them. And not coincidentally, they seem to help people to do that, to go out and relapse and die or commit suicide. And that sounds pretty off the wall to say like that, but hopefully I'll be able to explain why a lot of that is true. So I found this website called disruptedphysician.com a few years ago, and it's Dr. Michael Langen. He's a doctor in Massachusetts, and so I'll show the website and get there. So he was a doctor in Massachusetts, and he went to a treatment program that he heard about that was supposed to help doctors, and apparently he didn't know that these programs require long-term monitoring and also extortionist levels of treatment and drug testing, and even then fraudulent results, and almost impossible to get out of the program if you don't sort of say that the program saved your life. And that's how Alcoholics Anonymous works in general, but this website sort of explains how this happens on the professional level, which is much more than just the personal level. Since the 80s, people have been convinced to send their kids to rehab. The whole teenage troubled teen industry is a big part of the 12-step history and the history of rehabs and abusive rehabs. And this is actually just evolution and outgrowth of those kinds of programs that have been modified from those days into bringing in more people with more problems than just drugs and alcohol. It could be any kind of emotional disorder, anything. And they'll give you a personality test, very similar to Scientology. If you get assessed by one of these places, you definitely are going to have signs of the disease, and you're definitely going to get recommended to go to treatment. And if they have leverage over you, they'll use that. You'll possibly lose what they can take away from you. Whatever they can find that you need or want that they can take away from you, they'll do that to make sure that you participate in the program. And that's why they're called tough love programs. And you can watch them on TV, like the show called Intervention and stuff. But I just wanted to show you this because I think the main purpose of DisruptedPhysician.com is this idea of regulatory capture, which when people say that AA is like a government conspiracy or that kind of thing, what they're missing out is that government agencies are created to regulate industries like this, like the rehab industry. And what regulatory capture is when those government agencies are taken over by the industry. Here it says regulatory capture is a form of government failure that occurs when a regulatory agency created to act in the public interest instead advances the commercial or political concerns of special interest groups that dominate the industry or sector it is charged with regulating, and introduced in an article. Okay, so that's the basic idea of regulatory capture. Now, just to give you a sense of where he's coming from with this, he has lost his medical license. It's been suspended, and he's been fighting this for years now, since like 2011 or something. And he recently went to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court to try to argue that his complaints should be acknowledged, including complaints that felony forensic fraud was committed against him just to oppress him and keep him in this this never-ending cycle of treatment. And anybody who's been in Alcoholics Anonymous knows that you never actually get better in Alcoholics Anonymous. So if there was a program, a professional program that is based on that, you can expect that you'll never get out of that program. You'll never really get out of that program. It'll always be hanging over your head. Here's I wrote a whole post about his case, the different documents that he's submitted to the courts, and also he's got a couple of audio blogs that I'll give you a taste of now, just so you can see where he's coming from. This one I had it lined up to where I wanted it to be, but
nonprofits in each state that have some sort of arrangement, examiners they use, there's boards, so they've subverted the system in a form of regulatory capture. In fact, in Massachusetts, there's increasing evidence that one of the board attorneys has been suppressing evidence for the discount. One of these programs actually have multiple outside evaluations. And what happens is these outside evaluations get blocked. The biggest complaint I've heard from physicians is that everything I have presented that discounts the diagnosis was not only unaddressed, but unacknowledged. And this is a problem that they have infiltrated some of the medical boards so that information never gets beyond the person they have in there who blocks it from getting from the actual board. So they've subverted the system in a form of regulatory capture. In fact, in Massachusetts, there's increasing evidence that one of the board attorneys has been suppressing evidence for 20 years or so in removing complete due process and fundamental freedoms of all the physicians who've gone through her. This is an issue that must be addressed. The problem is getting exposure. They've done a very good job of insulating themselves so that the mainstream media is not interested. They've pretty much enjoyed secrecy and privacy and remain untouched since 1990. So this has been going on for 25 years. And the other thing they've done is in state agencies, medical societies, other state chapters of the American Psychiatric Association, they've put people in there who essentially block any complaints, anything negative, so none of the information gets to the people who should see it and could do something about it. This really needs to change because the effect on the profession of medicine has been profound. They've really poisoned the system, and many of the doctors who are involved in this, if they were in a criminal justice system, they would have never practiced medicine again. Now they're in charge. So this being outside of the mainstream medical community, they're able to protect themselves, commit crimes, do whatever.
So that's a taste of his audio podcast. There was another little clip, but that was just basically showing the problem that most people come across, which is most people who are involved in this situation, they're just astounded by the impossibility of presenting an argument, presenting alternatives, presenting second opinions, that kind of thing. Any kind of complaints that you would expect in a complaint process, any kind of actually this one I'm posting into a public group called Demand ACL, so there was another group called HIPAA violation patterns, and one of the reasons why I'm so mad about this is that I recently got earlier this year I had heard that the Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights was conducting an investigation. So now 6 months later I get a letter saying that they are not going to investigate. My allegation was that my complaint letters would not be amended to my medical records. And basically what happened was I had filed complaints, I had written complaint letters, I got my medical records, I went through them, I compared them with other providers, and I was more and more irritated by what I saw there. So I then was advised to get a second copy of my medical records. That's good practice just to see if they had the audacity to change anything or remove things, and in fact they did. They removed my or some early session notes saying that I went to therapy because I didn't want to be in AA, and they also they removed all of my complaint letters. And that's when I said I want those included in my records. And then I found out that it's HIPAA right to request that your records be amended in a case like that. I think it has to be for cases like that. And if they do not want to amend them, they should give you a proper response and reason why. And the only response I got was that they just weren't technically a part of my medical records. But it seems completely legitimate for those complaints to be there, because there's absolutely no way the way that they removed my complaints from my records and then interpreted it from a perspective that just doesn't acknowledge them at all. They certainly could look pretty crazy without that context. So here's another clip of Michael Langen, just because I found a couple of interesting spots, and so this should be worth listening to here.
Currently, there's effectively no restraint on this system because there's no one recognizing it. One of the biggest deterrents of committing a crime is what are the chances that you will get caught for it, and what are the punishment? What's the punishment going to be? These people live in a world where there's essentially zero chance of getting caught, and no chance of getting punishment. So they essentially do anything they want. What they've also done is put in legal and regulatory and public policy that protects them. For example, the release of records, they've restricted release of records, they've restricted release of information so that anyone in this program cannot get their own records. They've removed choice in healthcare, they've removed choice in assessment, and the underlying culture is a Machiavellian culture of fear, culture of bullies, and they basically tell people, do what we say, our way or the highway, command and control, and that's it. And there's no way to effectively go to anyone. There's these people are on their own, and the reason everyone should be concerned about this is because they're changing these to they're still going to be called, they're PHPs, but they're professional health programs. They've already got into the airlines. There's a lot of airline pilots I've talked to who are in these programs, but they want to make it the standard of care. And by using an administrative agency or a license, they could set up these same systems at a Department of Motor Vehicles. They could, the Postal Service, anywhere. And of course, they would be using the same non-FDA approved tests and the same network of facilities who are willing to provide diagnoses that don't exist so they can profit from unneeded treatment. And that network is expanding. There's a polygraph examiners they use. There's specialized tests that they've actually introduced that are nothing more than pseudoscience and bogus.
So you mentioned the professional health programs, and that's part of what my research brings into play a little bit more. Here's so when I found that this was going on, sort of to my therapist, or with the group of therapists that I was dealing with, that this was sort of a requirement, or it was just the preferred practice, or the standard operating procedure. I started to really look into what it took to become a licensed professional in New York State, especially around addiction-related issues. And because initially when I had started to complain, I thought it was very obvious that this is a religious activity. It's been established through a lot of cases. There's this one book that's really interesting. It's called Resisting 12-Step Coercion, How to Fight Forced Participation in AA, NA, or 12-Step Treatment. And that's one of the books that I had sort of read while I was going through that process of being forced into these rehab groups, and spending way too much money, and thinking, well, this book makes a lot of sense, so I would expect my therapist to totally understand and get my argument. And I was actually I was doing other treatments at the time, alternative treatments. I was doing smart recovery meetings, and I was talking to Jack Trimpey from Rational Recovery online, and he was telling me about how these therapists would never help me. And I think, like most people, and like Dr. Langan, I just found it so hard to believe that, because they seem like somewhat rational people, and some like compassionate, you expect them to at least acknowledge the complaints or acknowledge the problem, because it's obviously a problem. It's happened to a lot of people. And even hearing them voice like stress over the whole issue as if there's some politics going on behind the scenes that has nothing to do with my therapy. It has had to do with the politics in New York State, which is what I'm getting at. So Jack Trimpe, who I was also getting advice from at the time, he told me that there's nothing I can do. All I can do is just say goodbye and leave this whole treatment system. And I just couldn't believe it. I didn't really want to feel like I was powerless over getting my voice heard about this, or having my complaint heard. So that was, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, because I wanted to talk about professional health programs, which Dr. Langen mentioned. And because if you don't believe that this is true, remember, when I complained to the New York State Office of Professions, and they're the people who license therapists in New York State. Well, when you talk about regulatory capture, you're talking about an agency like the Office of Professions that create laws about how the professionals should act and what punishments they might face for what kind of malpractice. And the weirdest thing is that you would think it's malpractice to insist somebody join a religious cult. But in fact, a lot of professionals are afraid of not recommending this, because the social and the employment pressure on them is such that if they criticize the 12 steps or suggest to their client that they don't need to be in a support group or AA, they might be accused of malpractice. And further beyond that, they might actually be forced into a rehab. Well, look at this video, and maybe you can see what I mean about that.
I work at my recovery every day. It's an illness.
I started drinking hours before my shift.
My job was in jeopardy.
If you're a licensed professional struggling with a drug or alcohol problem, please get help. Each year, thousands of doctors, nurses, accountants, engineers, and other professionals get treatment for drug and alcohol problems. By getting treatment and recovering, they lead healthier, more successful lives.
But I had to take that step. I had to get over the fear and put myself out there.
I appreciate having the opportunity to be able to recover from this and move on in my professional career.
There are confidential programs that help New York State licensed professionals with drug or alcohol problems. These programs help professionals get treatment, recover, and in most cases resume professional practice safely.
My participation in the PAP program was really the only alternative to retaining my nursing license that I cherished.
If you are struggling with alcohol or drugs, please get help.
Reclaim the life that you worked so hard to build.
So, so you can see on that this was a video that I found on the Office of Professions website, and it mentions right here Professional Assistance Program. And this is for licensed professionals: nurses, dentists, pharmacists, accountants, mental health professionals. So all of these people are expected to be in recovery, especially if they have ever admitted to, or if somebody else accuses them of having a problem with drugs or having some kind of emotional issues that affect their work. Peer Assistance for Nurses program and a Committee for Physicians Health program. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a member of the Federation of State Physicians Health Programs, which is what Michael Langen is talking about when he says that these physician health programs organizations are taking over state departments of health. So that video pretty much shows it right there pretty clearly. But this was also in the context of a few other things I found out, that not only was there a case in 2002 that said that OASAS professionals could not force people into AA. Let me see if I can find that now. Not sure if I'll be able to find that right now. But if you look at this page is OASAS. This is the State Department for New York. What is recovery? It's an intensely personal experience that's hard to define in a general way. There are multiple pathways to recovery: treatment, faith, spirituality, criminal justice interventions, natural, support from individuals, mutual assistance group, and recovery community centers. So it sounds like multiple pathways. You can find your own way, but people who've been through the AA program know that it's not really like that. There's a lot of ways to go to find AA, basically, and you can take a lot of detours and go bankrupt, and eventually you'll be forced into AA. You can try other programs like SMART, moderation, and eventually those will be taken off the table and you're going to AA. But so intensely personal experience is hard to define in a general way, but then they go on to show all these phases of recovery which line up very well with the AA program. Transition stabilization occurs within the first 90 days of recovery. And 90 meetings in 90 days is a AA tradition. And early recovery phase is between that 90 days and 1 year. And 1 year is an AA tradition of the disease. The so-called disease is supposedly in remission after 1 year of abstinence and also meeting attendance. So during these two recovery phases, a person may attend self-help meetings, mutual assistance meetings, work with a recovery coach, participate in recovery group therapy. And these are all code words for AA. Work with recovery supportive friends and or connect with a faith institution. It's all code words because that document that I am looking, I'll find eventually, basically says that you can't force people into AA. But what they've done is they just don't mention AA. They just do. They use different words for it. Like they use the word recovery. You have to be in recovery, and that's how my interventionist referred to it, as I wasn't in recovery technically under his definition. Whatever, we know what that meant. Here's another picture from OASAS. This is the McPike Addiction Treatment Center. Here's a picture with Bill W. right here. And I didn't organize these all that well. So in case you think that it's just in New York and maybe Massachusetts now, here's another example I just wanted to show quickly, that Pennsylvania Department of Drug and Alcohol programs. There was an expose by Ford Turner of the Reading Eagle earlier this year that an employee, a state employee, had felt that she was demoted and eventually had felt the need to leave her job because of pressure about speaking out against the situation there, which is that the Karen Treatment Center, Big 12-Step Treatment Center, and the lobbying group called DASPOP had a huge amount of influence over the State Department, to the degree that she said that she basically interviewed with this lobbyist to get the job. And some of the articles go into what the disagreements are about, how it's impossible to contact anybody or get much information, but how much money these lobbyists appear to be making. And if you don't think that that has anything to do with the Pennsylvania's ability to share information about the problem, you can find their list of support services on pa.gov, and you'll find Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, a 12-step program, Alateen, a 12-step program, Nar-Anon, Narcotics Anonymous, Problem Gambling, 12-step programs for recovery, licensed halfway houses, which I can get into also. I might get into that a little bit later. I'm thinking of the Oxford House, and I can get into the Surgeon General's report on that. But so basically it just shows a bunch of 12-step programs. Doesn't imply that there's any information out there other than 12-step. And problem gambling might seem like a little bit a strange thing because it's not a drug or alcohol, but it's now considered an addiction. And New York State, OASAS, actually this year earlier, has added 12-step inpatient treatment for problem gambling and brought in Gamblers Anonymous meetings into their state-run rehabs. So to get back to those state-run rehabs, here is McPike, the one with the picture of Bill W. earlier. This post is just about my realization that OASAS really is, it's a 12-step agency for New York. That's what it is. And I mean, it's very similar to, well, it's a government agency, but obviously it was formed by AA members, recovery people. And they obviously have some concerns that are worth bringing to public attention, just like the New York Council on Problem Gambling, which is a Gamblers Anonymous group that started lobbying, and now OASAS pays them to lobby, apparently, and they're the ones that have designed the problem gambling program for OASAS rehabs. But here's, just in case you don't believe me about how 12-step they are, even though they're technically not supposed to use words like this, or use AA 12-step language, they do. All the rules and regulations go out the window when you're actually in one of these places or under their control. Here's a couple examples.
And we hold the AA meetings in here.
And
are you willing to go to any lengths to live?
And your answer was?
My answer was, and I still tell people to this day, if Mary Rose, and I told her that day in that office, if Mary Rose told me to wear a pink dress every day for the rest of my life, and that would keep me sober and alive, I hope I look good in it. I tell people to this day that story.
In the past, when I first started, we were helping people discover they had a mental illness. Now they seem to know, and they bring with it their interplay that comes into it. Basically using addiction drugs to medicate your mental health systems. So it's an honor to be associated with that.
This one.
So if you are the family member of
Oh, this-
somebody who's actively using, I would strongly encourage you to look in your paper and identify some Al-Anon meetings. Al-Anon meetings are self-help meetings, 12-step based, for people who have a significant other or somebody in their life who's actively using or has in the past. So at least in an Al-Anon context, you can begin to understand
That it's a disease.
yes, and that you don't want to contribute to it,
Mm.
and to learn a concept which is called loving detachment. So that is,
So that video right there just tells a lot. First of all, it brought in that your family is going to be told to go to Al-Anon, which means even whether you choose a 12-step program or not, your family is going to be 12-stepping you or learning to 12-step you. And they're going to be learning that it's a disease, that you have lost control of your brain, and they're going to learn a concept called loving detachment, which turns out to be cult shunning, sort of like the Scientology show that Leah Remini is doing on A&E. The whole theme of the first season, or at least a couple of the episodes, or a lot of the episodes, was disconnection. This whole idea, and it's common with a lot of different cults. It's how a group can continue to exist when they're faced with facts and information that doesn't make any sense within their worldview. They just pretend it doesn't exist. And that's how the AA group really works, and they rely on that blocking of information and denial, just denial, flat out denial. And Michael Langan describes it as dismiss, delay, and deflect. So they might say that they'll address it, but they just don't ever get around to it. They might just dismiss it as crazy talk. They may actually, like in my case, they gave me antipsychotics. I was dealing with that kind of stuff for a year, going to treatments, just to help me try to stop obsessing or help me accept the fact that nobody's going to acknowledge this. So I and the state ended up paying a lot of money to protect this cult, basically. That's how I look at it. So that was going into the professional thing. Now, I've done a lot of activism on this, and I've talked to a lot of people, including the AA General Service Office. And what I told them was that they have these pamphlets that they give out to their members, and they teach their members how to I must have lost a lot of tabs here, but here it is. So they go and they proselytize in hospitals. They're called hospitals and institutions committees. And so it's AA groups. They go to jails, hospitals, and they hold AA meetings there. And they try to set up connections so when people get out, they're connected with AA support groups. And it's hard to imagine any other religious group being allowed to do that. But the way that AA presents itself, they somehow get away with it. And so I just want to show you the what I was talking about when I the whole problem here is who do you place the blame on, because you can't blame Alcoholics Anonymous itself. And that's actually the most moderate view, in my opinion. People think it's an extremist view, but it's a very moderate view because you're blaming an idea, a stupid idea, or a whole set of stupid ideas, instead of people. Like, so do you blame a doctor for being required? This is standard operating procedure. Do you say, okay, you should lose your license because you recommended a religious cult? No. you change the regulations so that they don't have to do that anymore, because currently they have to do that to be considered professional. And the reason why it's like that is because of lobbying efforts, and because of a lot of different kinds of pressures. One of them happens to be the tradition. Where is it? Oh, here it is. This is from the General Service Manual of Alcoholics Anonymous, and here I found it to be, somebody shared this with me and they said, doesn't this sound kind of weird and scary? So AA agrees that they can't be aggressively publicly aggressive, suing people, and like Scientology does. It says, privately, however, we can inform tradition violators that they're out of order. When they persist, we can follow up by using such other resources of persuasion as we may have, and these are often considerable. Now think about that in the context of the professional extortion that I'm touching on right now, but there's a lot more to go into it in terms of just number of examples of other doctors and nurses and pilots, lawyers, and I'm presenting the idea that therapists are also subjected to this. Manifested in this fashion, a persistent firmness will often bring the desired result. So we're talking about other such resources of persuasion, such as you're not going to have a job, or you may get otherwise punished. And also, this Bill W. here mentions, in the long run, we have to rely on the pressures of AA opinion and public opinion. To this end, we shall need to maintain a continuous education of public communications channels. So that means that they realize that how media savvy they have to be and how they have to influence the press and inform the general public also, especially on misuses of the name Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the other things, there's a woman who did a video on the fact that she had been forced into 12-step AA panels from a hospital, Cedar Sinai, and she made a video saying that that had happened, and also she had been writing critical articles about AA, and Alcoholics Anonymous actually sent her a letter and informed her about the tradition of anonymity, how she shouldn't be using real names, and that kind of thing. Basically, using a little bit of a scare tactic or a guilt trip to try to get her to at least make her the criticism seem a little less credible by disconnecting them from real people. One of the reasons why I chose to put my real name on this, use my face, is because when I first started, I was very afraid of talking about this because of the superstition I mentioned, and also actual fear of retaliation. Having learned through experience multiple times that, if I try to complain about this to my therapist, I'm going to get terminated. I was banned from ever speaking to them ever again, which makes no sense. But so you go through a couple experiences like that where you think, what if I do something wrong, like I don't put a stamp on the letter, hand-delivered the letter, and that meant they would never address it because I had broken some boundary or something. So they come up with these little things that you do wrong, like you filed the complaint too late, you didn't do it in time, you didn't put your social security number on it or something, and you get so afraid of doing little thing wrong that you start to shut down and sort of be afraid of doing much of anything because of, anything you try, you might get retaliation. And so let's see, I got a little bit off track there, but that was just an example of what they mean when they say this combination of counterforces can be very discouraging to violators or would-be violators. They are expecting you to shut up, and that's what they want you to do. Under these conditions, they soon find their deviations to be unprofitable and unwise. Our experience has shown that continuous general education respecting our traditions will be a reliable preventative and protection in the years to come. Feeling the weight of all these forces, certain members who run counter to AA's traditions sometimes say that they are being censored or punished, and and that they are therefore being governed. It would appear, however, that AA's right to object calmly and privately to specific violations is at least equal to the rights of the violators to violate. That puts a whole different spin on feedback, criticism, debate. No, it's violators violating. This cannot be accurately called a governmental action. Some deviators have suffered rather severe personal criticism from individual AA members, and this is to be deplored. However, this is no reason for us to stop reminding all concerned about the undesirability of breaking AA's traditions before the entire public. It can be said in all fairness that the difficulties of those who contravene the traditions are chiefly troubles of their own making. So, even when it's a tough love program and they use leverage such as your employment, your family, they want your family to shun you or disown you. They don't acknowledge their part in that. They say that those troubles are basically natural consequences, troubles of their own making. My interventionist, James Garrett, wrote a whole book about this called Invitational Intervention. And the Arise intervention is like a Johnson intervention. Johnson intervention is basically what you see on TV when the families get together, they confront the so-called addict, or they confront the addict and say, if you don't go to rehab right now for a month, we're all not ever going to speak to you again, or something along those lines. And one of the I have not watched a whole lot of them, but anytime you tune into A&E's intervention, you'll find something like that going on. And the last episode I remember seeing, it was a woman had relapsed or something, or she wasn't doing what she was supposed to do, and the interventionist said, now she's going to have to feel what it's like to lose everything. So they're definitely playing an extortionist game. And when you get into the laws on parity, mental health and addiction treatment parity, which means insurance companies have to pay for it, that's why you're getting so much FBI looking into fraud right now, because they're using all kinds of different tricks to get people into treatment. Either actively giving them drugs to relapse so that they can admit them into treatment that pays them thousands of dollars. They don't care about the person that's going off to these places, and they don't care about the quality of treatment they're getting, because in fact relapse pays. So this guy, James Garrett, in this book he says, coercion, persuasion, and mandated conditions are long held and practical referral components of substance abuse treatment. All are designed to work within a system that the substance abusers have contact with, has some meaning in their lives, and has some leverage to motivate consequences. So there's that leverage, and the leverage, like what Michael Langan was talking about, which is the medical license or the professional license. he goes on to say, we now accept the importance of employee assistance programs, and I linked here to the HIMSS program for pilots, and I've heard 2 or 3 pilots right now, by now I've heard, have been through the exact same experience of being really extorted, not able to get out of these programs, not able to find an alternative way to get there, to be monitored. And most of them, they don't object to monitoring, they object to the treatment that they're getting in this spiritual program. And also drug courts. Drug courts I didn't even mention yet, but this one links to Barry Hazel, who won in California a couple of years ago. He won a case against California. The jail made him go to AA meetings or something, and he was able to fight that, but it took years. And impaired professionals programs, this actually links to disruptedphysician.com. So so the point I just wanted to make here is that the interventionist that I was required to go to, he does this pretty blatantly, recommends coercion into the programs. And then he says that people who are not coerced usually don't do well. The lowest rates of successful treatment are with voluntary self-referrals. So I just added the point that maybe if you're voluntary, you automatically don't think that you are powerless, you don't think that you're defective, you don't think that you're insane. It's really a catch-22 situation. And a lot of this, my point is that it's not a game, it's not a joke, but these people, the professionals in the 12-step groups, they are definitely playing it like a game. That's why they team up on you. Here's one note. Once you're isolated into one-on-one confrontations with the alcoholic almost always wins. The alcoholic in one-on-one interactions has the power to manipulate with promises and short-term offers to improve, then blaming you as a cause of the problem. So there's this language of winning and losing and not letting the alcoholic win, and the assumption that any attempt to get out of this treatment is manipulation, which it's not. If you read The Sober Truth by Lance Doties, he explains from a scientific point of view why it's irrational to insist that AA works when it doesn't. A couple more, just to want to get back to Dr. Langen's case. I had a couple clips lined up, and then I'll show some little further things about how Office of Professions, how the state agencies work in New York, and how the lobbyists work. Let's just watch these clips and see if they spark any ideas here.
However, I had to resign from Mass General. I used up my retirement account to keep my kids in school. Then we tried to work it out so I didn't have to resign, but I had to resign to get my pension to keep my kids in school. I've since had to pull them out in the past 6 months. And we're probably going to be homeless in the next couple months. And this is not an uncommon occurrence with the PHS. There's no oversight, no accountability, and I feel that complete due process had been removed. None of this has ever been addressed, and I was, hoping that this court would look at the facts and see that the board has never addressed any of these issues. they've all been provided to Tracy Otina and Deb Stoller, and I suspect that she never forwarded them to the board. For example, the letter from William Burgess documenting the Establishment Clause violation, that was sent within 2 months of my suspension, and the board attorney refused to provide it to the board. They've never addressed it. And as with my monitoring plan that was introduced December 19th, 2012, it says, please forward to board members. They've never addressed it. There's 12 documents.
I'm afraid your time is up.
So that's another example of just not having the complaints addressed. Just complete refusal to acknowledge. And here's one more. This is the Assistant Attorney General answering questions by the Supreme Court, Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court justices who seem to be on to the extortionist idea here, even though they eventually they decided to not do anything. So let's have a look at what I set up here.
Time, whatever the duration of that agreement, the practice is okay.
And what duration are you talking about generally?
Well, the original letter of agreement was for 5 years. When the addendum was put on, it was for an additional 3 years. In this case, we haven't, we didn't get to a point where we were doing a back and forth.
Just trying to get a sense. So basically, you want him to submit and you to agree upon, if you allow me to return to the practice of medicine, my work will be monitored, or my practice will be monitored by this person for this period of time.
Yeah, under a certain set of protocols, Your Honor, yes. And also a substance abuse monitoring plan. So in other words...
And what does that mean? You want him to be tested periodically?
Exactly, Your Honor.
Okay, and then proof of abstinence is you want those tests to be clean for a period of time.
Yes, and there's also sort of a look back too. There's no evidence of the board of any testing since 2013. So they would like a year's worth of past, in other words, up to this point, to a year prior, some type of testing or other evidence that there has not been a relapse and he's remained sober.
So you need testing before the worksite plan can be implemented.
That's correct, Your Honor.
And if he's broke, who's to pay for that testing?
I don't know how that works. Typically, I think that the doctor is responsible for that testing. I don't know if there's a pot of money somewhere for people who may be broke or indigent, Your Honor. But in any case, I think that it's I don't think it's a condition one can waive due to financial constraints, because it's one tailored to the public welfare and safety.
There's no provision? There's no provision to say that if you're unable to afford to pay? I mean, we don't, if somebody's on probation in our court and we require them to take blood tests, we don't say you are in violation if you can't afford to pay for them. We have provision for that. Does the board have no provision for that?
I don't know that answer, Your Honor, but I can certainly look into it and reply to the court. I know that, for example, the courts by statute, I think, have a pot of money for indigent people. I don't know that the general court has given that to the board.
No, we haven't, I'm sure. But does the board not have any? Is there no way for a doctor who's indigent to be able to return? I mean, it seems problematic for a public board to have a process for which the ability to pay could mean that the person may not be able to return to the practice of medicine.
Well, I would say at the very least, Your Honor, if that's the issue here, and if he follows the board process and submits that type of evidence, then the board could certainly explore that type of process. I'm not myself aware of one, but if it was a concern raised in this case properly to the board, and they considered it, and then there again was a problem, it could be reviewed. But we didn't get to that point below.
Let me just sort of try to get a bigger picture here of what's going on. Is the doctor correct that there's never been a question of competence or performance, and that that all of this has not resulted from problems with patient care?
No, there was never a complaint by patient care.
So, so that was overview of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court justices questioning the situation. But one thing that I found particularly interesting in that scene was the 1 year look back, which Assistant Attorney General Bertram referred to, because earlier in this I showed you that the I think I closed it now, but I showed you the What is Recovery by New York State OASAS, OASAS' state website, and they refer to that 1 year of early sobriety, and I mentioned that that's a AA tradition. So they're definitely wanting proof of 1 year of abstinence before this doctor would be allowed to resume the practice. So he wouldn't be able to just prove that he's sober, which he's already done for years now. He would have to prove that he's sober for a full year. And so I have a whole running blog post on this. Just any news that I get on it will be added to it. After this hearing, Dr. Langen submitted forget the legal terms, and my mind's going a little bit blank right now, but he showed the court how the Assistant Attorney General had made conscious factual misrepresentations to get them to ignore what was in the documents in front of them and make it sound like a pretty simple thing to ignore these complaints. And so he's bringing Establishment Clause violations to bear on this, and they've been so far ignored. And Establishment Clause is a big deal with, that's the reason why OASAS has to speak in code language when they talk about what their treatment is, even though it goes out the window when they're actually doing the treatment. Another thing about the First Amendment is Establishment Clause is using government structures and money to promote a religion, which is what happens in the case of AA. They use Medicaid money. That's not legal. Any state money can't be used to promote AA, and it is all the time with OASAS. OASAS money is state money. They give it to 12-step programs almost exclusively, and that's illegal. Nobody seems to care. The ACLU should care about this, but ACLU is really more interested in religious freedom. So ACLU did historically fight against making somebody go to, I think it's a DWI case or something, where they argued it on the basis of religious freedom, so that having to go to a AA treatment was infringing on their rights to practice their own religion freely. But the argument was, the conversation about that was that they should have really gone after the Establishment Clause, and it turned out that the lawyer was feeling sympathy for AA, and they wanted at least for people to be informed about AA. So they didn't want it to be shut out of government. This woman, Ellen Luft, she didn't want it to be shut out from government programs. So she didn't fight it. She didn't fight the Establishment Clause, and basically that really empowered their, the ignoring of the Establishment Clause, and then but still talking about religious freedom. That really empowered AA to continue using more and more state funding. And so the ACLU has really neglected that. But it's not just state departments. There's the Federal Department of Health, the Department of Health and Human Services. They did a report. The Surgeon General oversaw the creation of a report facing addiction earlier this year or late last year. And part of my some of my complaints have been about religious discrimination. There's a whole bunch of different cases that are worth looking into, and I'm not really a legal person, so I haven't got too deep into them, but I know that it's a legitimate argument and it has won. But what I found in that document, Facing Addiction in America. Oh, I'm not showing my website. So, facing it. I thought I was showing my website for a while there, but so I should go back and show this ACLU's history of not defending the Establishment Clause. I have a blog post about that, and it has to do with a lawyer who is an ACLU lawyer who is a friend of a anti-AA activist who was actually denied employment or sort of forced out of his teaching position because the college wouldn't let him present anti-AA views or the idea that AA is a religious cult to his grad students. He was not hired again, and he fought it a little bit. His friend was an ACLU lawyer, and their argument was over the religious liberty versus the Establishment Clause. So I'm really rambling back and forth here, and this is because I have all this information from over 3 years of doing this now, of looking into it and finding some of my own perspectives on this material. And I haven't really figured out how to present it all in a way that is linear. I kind of jump back and forth and hope that the dots get connected. But here's the Health and Human Services non-discrimination policy in the Facing Addiction report. It says HHS complies with applicable federal civil rights laws and does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, age, disability, or sex. HHS does not exclude people or treat them differently because of race, color, national origin, age, disability, or sex. In most of the non-discrimination notices that I've seen that come from the Office for Civil Rights used to say, or religion. And religion is not in this non-discrimination notice, and you start to wonder if that's intentional, considering that this whole document advertises for the 12-step programs quite a bit. For example, HHS. I made a few points, starting with this omission of the word religion in that non-discrimination notice. I found some misrepresentations about the 12-step program, such as it says, within some communities, recovery is seen as being aligned with a particular religion, yet in other communities, such as the AA Fellowship, recovery is explicitly not religious, but instead considered spiritual. And so when you tell an AA member that it's a religious program, they will just say, no, it's not. And they won't look at any of the evidence that courts have said it obviously is religious. Here's a class action ethics complaint by Jack Trimpe. This is from 2001. and it's to the National Association of Social Workers about members of Alcoholics Anonymous who are practicing therapy, which is called two-hatting. This is sort of the main theme of my entire work. This is what I am really fighting against, is just therapists who feel it's their job to force people into AA. And he makes a bunch of different points about how that doing that, proselytizing for AA in the context of their job, is it violates a lot of the NASW ethics code, such as the commitment to clients, because there is a conflict of loyalty between commitment to clients and the commitment to the unity of AA. There's also social workers should respect and promote the right of clients to self-determination and assist clients in their efforts to identify and clarify their own goals. So informed consent is a very big one, that when they refuse to let people know about the debates, the conflicts, the disagreements over the efficacy of 12-step programs, when they just act like there is no such argument, they're not allowing their clients to provide informed consent. So consent is one thing. If it has to be consensual that it's not coercive. And in order to really be consented to, a treatment to be consented to, it has to be well informed. You have to be aware of your options, and that's something that does not happen. You could bring other options to the table if you find them, and they might acknowledge them, and but in the end, on paper, in my experience, those won't be acknowledged seriously, not seriously at least. And what I was looking for specifically in this one is so we must face the fact that despite its energetic disclaimers, Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step programs are unequivocally religious. In the words of 2 federal courts of appeal, when clients complain that AA appears religious, it is unethical for a two-hatter to deny what any non-AAer would conclude, e.g. that the program is religious in nature. So, and that basically points out that it's gaslighting. If you go and say to a client, here, you have to do these steps, and the steps say, admit you're powerless, hand your will and your life over to the care of God, and then the client says, that's a religious program, and your only response to that is, no, it's not. Here's what AA tells people to, tells professionals to do in response to that. It's too religious. In fact, AA is not a religious program, but a spiritual fellowship. So they encourage people to just deny that it's a religious program. And then if the client says, I don't want to stand up there and bare my soul in front of a lot of other people, in my opinion, what a professional should do is inform the client that those are public meetings. Just because they're anonymous does not mean they're confidential. So you definitely shouldn't stand up and bare your soul in front of a lot of people that can't even tell you their full names. I don't want to meet with a lot of losers. It's too depressing. And their response is that we're actually winners. So this is very much like a programmed sales pitch. And everybody who's been through AA for a while knows all of these lines, and they know how to answer any question or objection, because AA is basically a program of selling AA. That's what AA is all about. And it's also a program of creating and refining your story about how AA saved your life and how you would be dead without AA. And to not acknowledge that fact also is a little bit of a gaslighting thing to do. If a client comes and says, well, just what I said right there, that it's an indoctrination program. I don't know what other response you could have to it. You're not going to say, no, Alcoholics Anonymous actually does teach about, it doesn't teach about health problems. It doesn't teach about any of the physical effects of alcohol or drugs. It doesn't teach about research. In fact, in AA, research, the only thing they mean by research is go out and drink more until you come back to AA. And otherwise, they just want you to read books from the 30s and 40s. So I went through a whole bunch of process of trying to complain, and they basically just said, you should have known better. The first investigator told me they did nothing wrong, according to statute, which was surprising to me at the time. It's not so surprising anymore now that knowing that they are the regulators. I was even told that nothing I'm saying makes any sense, which is very strange. So I complained again. That complaint was also denied. They just said, we already decided nothing, they didn't do anything wrong. And then I started complaining to different agencies. I complained to Health and Human Services. I complained to the Office for Civil Rights. I complained to the New York State Justice Center. And for the most part, especially from Health and Human Services, I got notices that they just were not going to investigate it. And I asked them why they weren't going to investigate it. And they told me that, well, actually, the Office of Professions, the third investigation by them, the investigator called me up and he said, he asked my therapist if this happened. She said no. And he said, okay, well, I have to close the case. So that wasn't much of an investigation because they just said, oh, we didn't do that. But then as he was ending the call, he said, oh, and for the AA thing, we don't look into that. So that really set off my alarm bells again, that it's their policy, the Office of Professions policy is to not investigate the AA thing. And so when I brought it to the Department of Health and Human Services with the this new information about that their non-discrimination notice doesn't have the word religion in it, they responded to me briefly. Usually these conversations, sometimes they go a little ways before they kind of get cut off. Somebody thought it might be good to talk to me, and then somebody corrected them. I asked them, says, please note that OCR has limited jurisdiction to investigate complaints alleging discrimination on the basis of religion. The jurisdiction depends on the particular program and the funding source. So obviously there's a relationship between money and religion and what you can do in state departments of health. So I just want to make sure I hit on everything. I pulled up all of these different websites that I wanted to sort of touch on and see how I might talk about them a little bit. I went through this whole period where I was trying to just post a review on Yelp, and apparently they had gone to great lengths to have Yelp delete my reviews over and over again. First it was because I didn't provide enough detail. So I went into great detail and used names and everything. And then I got a rejection of my review saying that they had privacy concerns. And then I did it again, said, lacks a substantive consumer experience. Please describe your actual experience. Some more gaslighting. Sort of like I don't know what I actually experienced. Back to the Office of Professions. When I was given the reason for, I filed a FOIL request, which is the Freedom of Information Law. I wanted to get all the details I could about the investigation. They denied it, and they sent back the clause that said why they didn't have to share the records with me or why they needed to keep them private. But right under that clause, there was this temporary surrender of licenses during treatment. And I found this is basically that 12-step extortion written into New York State law. Your license can be surrendered. There's a committee. There will be a committee with expertise, and a treatment program will be identified. And an approval of the treatment program by the committee shall not constitute a representation as to the probability of success of the program or any assumption of financial responsibility for its costs. So they can put you in a program that has no probability of success or very little, and it could be very expensive, and that's not their problem. But it is your problem, because if you don't complete the program, if you don't successfully complete the program, you might have the immunity from disciplinary action revoked. So you may face consequences if the program that doesn't work for you. And of course, exemption of any liability for the people involved in the intervention. So that's very real that this goes on in New York State, that professionals are afraid of being caught up in something like that. I found all kinds of different websites. I've connected with people. We gathered a bunch of letters, and we sent out letters to Commissioner of New York State Education Department. Samaritan Institute is the accreditation mill, whatever, that creates the Samaritan counseling centers, and there's Samaritan counseling centers all over. I at first thought it was just sort of a local counseling center, but then I found out that my supervisor, who's the executive director of that one in Albany, or Scotia, he's on the Samaritan Institute board of directors, which means he not only creates policy for my therapist to treat me that way, but probably for the whole group of hundreds, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of counselors. I don't know how many. I would say probably hundreds of state licensed counselors across the country. And when I complained to them about it, his name disappeared from that board of directors list, but I never got any response from them about these. I sent them to the Association of Social Workers in New York. I sent them to the Department of Health and Human Services in New York. And I wrote about this ever increasing, gradually escalating expensive treatments that didn't help me, and that there were I wrote about my basic experience, and then I had a couple other people write about what the problem was, how they had been through similar things, other people's experience with bad psychology of AA, or getting abused in these programs, or being forced into AA. Here's one by a nurse, and here's one by a Iraq veteran. And this one is by a guy who was in a very similar intervention as mine probably could have been trained by the guy who was my interventionist, because he created the Arise intervention, and this organization that did this to him and his family was a sponsor of that Arise intervention. Here's an extortionist contract that had to do with that nurse's extended case management, very similar to how they extended Michael Langen's contract. And this nurse gave up her license after this because she didn't want to go through it anymore. Here's an example of a letter that we sent to Samaritan Counseling Executive Director. We asked him to just acknowledge the problem and have a conversation about it, because I was being told that, well, I was already told that they would never speak to me again. And they just ignored it completely. And I would have been satisfied if they had acknowledged it and told me they would inform more of their clients about this problem. But they didn't, and the reason is becoming more and more clear. I actually filed complaints to the Attorney General and the General Inspector General, and they sent me to the Office of Mental Health. I called the Office of Mental Health, and they told me, and they said, well, oh, and here's another thing, because my first complaint, they said, oh, so can we get you into treatment? I'm like, I'm complaining about the treatment, and you're suggesting I go to treatment without any kind of evaluation, really? I mean, it's not, you're not even evaluating my complaint at this point, so how can you suggest I need treatment, especially more of the same treatment? So a few months ago, I called the Office of Mental Health, and they told me, well, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm okay. I went through a lot of hell for 3 years. And she's like, well, it must have worked. And that made me really mad. This complaint to the Attorney General, this is where they sent me to the Office of Professional Discipline and also to the Office of Mental Health. So I went back to the Office of Professional Discipline, who was really where I started complaining to, and in fact, the clinical director that I was complaining about is on the Office of Professions, so that really doesn't make any sense for me to complain there. Obviously, it's going to go nowhere, and in fact, they sent me a cease and desist. They told me cease and desist, sending these to us. And that was after the Attorney General suggested I talk to them. So, that's just a whole bunch of examples of things I've tried, and really nobody is acknowledging this. But the weirdest thing is that this cartoon that I made, it has tons of comments on it. It has a lot of supportive comments from people who have been through very similar situations. They mention having seen people driven to suicide by this kind of thing. So there's a lot of people out there who can acknowledge this problem. None of them happen to be working for New York State. Here's a list of resources in James Garrett's book. It's very similar to that Pennsylvania DDAP website. Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, Adult Children of Alcoholics Anonymous, Codependents Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous, Emotions Anonymous, Families Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, etc. So it's pretty clear what he's trying to do. Here are the contracts in his book. I showed the contracts. Michael Langen's contract is linked to on the website, and it's in his documents to the court. And I showed you that nurse's contract. This is an example of a private contract between an addicted individual and their family. And it's all of the exact same kind of things. I agree to abstain, and if I use any drugs or alcohol, I will start inpatient treatment immediately. So it's a very black and white situation. You're either completely abstinent or you're in a inpatient facility, and you're probably going to be going bankrupt pretty soon. And then this is what I found most interesting. I will allow natural consequences to take place regardless of their severity and my loved one's pleas, which means we'll do whatever we want, and we want you to not interfere with the punishments that we are going to inflict. And also agreeing to drug testing. I will agree to BAC or urine testing requested by my therapist and or support network. And so that situation is very similar. If you refuse to do that, or if you fail the test, or if it was questionable test, you might end up right back into inpatient treatment. Now, to go back to James Garrett, I want to talk about this a little bit, because at the same time I was being set up with this sort of contract that I would get into recovery with him, only a couple of days after that, he was charged with 5 felonies by state police. And let's see if I can find that. What's they call? Works. It works if you're paying him. He makes you pay if you don't. That's just this is a copy of the article that describes how he was charged with 5 felonies. He obviously wasn't convicted of them because he's still a licensed therapist. However, he's not working as an OASAS counselor anymore. So I don't know what happened there. Nobody's informed me about what happened. Maybe he gave it up. Maybe he resigned that license. But here's the fact that he was taking money from a probationer and telling the probation officer that the guy was attending individual sessions, maintaining abstinence, and testing negative for drugs. And at some point, the guy must have realized that James Garrett owned his whole life, or was leveraging him in unfair ways, and he went to the police and he told the police about the situation, and so the police brought him to court for fraud, basically fraudulent use of basically saying that his treatment worked when all he was doing was collecting money to say that it worked. And so that's what I was complaining about at the end, and nobody would listen to me. And I wasn't charged with 5 felonies, and I didn't have a DWI. I had just gone to therapy, looking for some help. And now, after becoming obsessed with this, I've basically chosen to go bankrupt, and I've been inpatient hospitalized a few times. The last time was completely involuntary, and it had to do with me, again, trying to file complaints and trying to get people's attention, and involuntarily hospitalized. And my bankruptcy was for another involuntary hospitalization at John George in California, in Alameda County. And they sent me a bill to sleep on the floor, $4,400 a day to sleep on the floor, for the doctor to tell me that I had to get over it. So I want to make all of this information as public as possible. Back to the federal level, the thing I wanted to, another misrepresentation I wanted to point out in the Surgeon General's addiction report was the Oxford houses. In the report it says, they encourage but do not require participation in 12-step mutual aid groups. But when you look at the Oxford House website, it says, Oxford House is not affiliated with AA or NA. But Oxford House members realize that only active participation in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous offers assurance of continued sobriety. Further, every Oxford House member attributes his sobriety to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. Each Oxford House member, as an individual, considers himself a member of AA or NA. Without that, sobriety would be short-lived. So that's actually in the Oxford House traditions, and it's not what the Surgeon General's report says about Oxford houses. And then I found this article about somebody who was kicked out of the Oxford House for relapsing, and he died. And it's and one anecdote says, there's a guy from the house saying, it's not in the rules, but we all accept that the only way to stay sober is through a 12-step program, and we hold one another accountable. If someone is not going to meetings, they will be confronted. So again, that's the teaming up group, a team approach to pressuring somebody into this cult. And this is the Oxford House website, and here's the tradition that I'm talking about. So there's a lot of things that I could talk about, and I've been talking though for almost 2 hours now, so I'll wrap it up, but I think this was a pretty good experiment. I would love any feedback, any ideas for how I might present this better, any ideas for connecting with other activists, anything that you liked or didn't like about this presentation. If you have any information related to or similar to, like for if maybe you have a similar evidence of this going on in other states that I don't seem to be aware of, I would love to hear about that kind of thing. Thanks.